The message came at 3:17 a.m. Earth Standard Time. An alert pinged inside the orbital defense station above Mars. Simple, short, and impossible. ESS Nightfall, status active. The same ESS Nightfall that had vanished without a trace 214 years ago. Commander Reese Holloway didn't even blink as alarms began to wail across the station. His hand, instinctive and scarred from 2 decades in command, slammed down on the comms switch. Full alert. Scramble long-range recon. I want visuals on that ship. Now. The bridge lit up in red as sensor techs scrambled to comply. There was disbelief in every pair of eyes. ESS Nightfall was the first ship to leave the solar system under the New Frontiers program, mankind's bold leap into interstellar space, a symbol of pride, hope, and untamed human ambition. It had also been their first loss, a deep, gnawing wound in humanity's memory. They said it got swallowed by a black hole or ripped apart by alien tech beyond their understanding. But now it was back, and it was heading straight for Earth. 23 minutes later, a grainy image flickered onto the screen. The crew fell dead silent. Holloway narrowed his eyes. That was Nightfall, all right. The hull markings matched, though the ship looked older, yet untouched by time. The design was unmistakable. Triangular frame, layered armor plating, massive rear thrusters. But what made Holloway's gut twist was the aura around it. He couldn't explain it. A feeling, a chill crawling up his spine like he was staring into something unnatural. It wasn't broadcasting any comms, just drifting closer. Distance? He barked. 2 million kilometers. Approach vector stable. No deviation. ETA to Earth's orbit. 6 hours, 51 minutes. Reese didn't hesitate. Lock a defensive grid. Activate high-orbit weapon systems. Get me EarthGov immediately. And wake Admiral Carrington. 6 hours later, Nightfall drifted into Earth's high orbit without so much as a thruster pulse. It was dead quiet, like a ghost ship running on pure will. Dozens of ships, drones, and surveillance units surrounded it. The world below watched, paralyzed between awe and terror. Every news outlet screamed theories. It was never gone. It was taken. It returned with knowledge. It returned with warnings. But no one could contact it. Not a single signal came out of the vessel. Until someone docked. Lieutenant Commander Brody Knox, ex-Special Forces, dishonorably discharged for an incident they still wouldn't talk about, was reinstated that very morning. His mission was clear. Dock, breach, retrieve black box, assess interior, and return. No heroics, no deviation. If the ship showed signs of danger, he was authorized to detonate and disintegrate it from the inside. He boarded with 4 others. Only he came out. When the airlock doors opened 3 hours later, Brody stepped out alone, his helmet cracked, his eyes distant. He collapsed onto the dock floor without saying a word. No signs of wounds, no radiation, just a slow whisper before he passed out. They brought something back. It's alive. 2 days later, EarthGov declared full interstellar emergency lockdown. Nightfall remained in orbit, silent, drifting like it was watching. Brody had been moved to a classified medical facility deep under Greenland ice, guarded by elite units. Every recording from his suit, every sample from Nightfall's hull was under encrypted containment. But one thing leaked, one image, a still from inside the bridge of Nightfall. It showed the crew, all 22 of them, sitting at their stations, eyes open, flesh preserved, unmoving, dead for over 200 years. Yet their hands were gripping the controls. And one of them, Brody's own great-great-grandfather, Captain Elias Knox, was staring into the camera, smiling. Brody Knox didn't wake up for 3 days. When he finally opened his eyes, the room was black. No windows, no monitors, Nothing but a single chair and 2 guards who looked more like executioners than medics. His mind felt like it had been fractured and stitched together wrong, like pieces were missing but still whispering inside his skull. He sat up slowly, rubbing at the crusted blood around his ears. One of the guards stepped forward. "Knox, you're in containment. Don't speak unless asked. Understood?" Brody didn't nod. He stared past the man like he was trying to hear something that wasn't there anymore. A voice crackled in over the intercom. Cold, calculated. "Begin debrief." The guard dropped a tablet in front of him. "Start talking." Brody's hands shook as he reached for it. The moment he touched the screen, static flooded the room's speakers. A low hum began to grow, like chanting, far away, underwater. He dropped it. "No," he said, barely audible. "It's not just a ship." The guard stiffened. Brody looked up, eyes wide now, desperate. "They're still on it. I mean, they're dead, but they're still there, still aware. Something kept them, preserved. It used them, wore them like puppets." The intercom buzzed. "Define it." Brody's breath caught. His jaw clenched. "I don't know what it is, but it wasn't built. It wasn't born. It's like something that grew from the dark between stars, a presence. It filled the ship when they found it, like a parasite crawling into an empty skull." He paused. "No, like it had been waiting. For a vessel, for mines, for pilots." The guards looked at each other. One of them tightened his grip on the stun baton. Brody leaned forward. "They brought it back because it wants us to know it's coming. Nightfall's just the warning. A carrier. The seed." The lights flickered. A second of pure blackout. And in that 1 second, the intercom blared with a voice that wasn't from Earth. Not English, not even human, just a low, whispering, guttural chant that echoed with pain and promises. When the lights returned, both guards were frozen. One was bleeding from the nose. The other had dropped to his knees, mumbling nonsense with his eyes rolled back. Brody stood, calmly now. He looked straight at the nearest wall camera. "You heard it too, didn't you?" he said. "It's not done with me. Not yet." In orbit, Nightfall's silent drift began to shift. Without any visible propulsion, without any detectable signal, the ship slowly turned. Not toward the sun, not toward Mars, but directly at Earth. All weapons in orbit locked onto it. High-orbit satellites readied kinetic kill systems. Nuclear platforms from 3 separate EarthGov factions stood on hair-trigger alerts. And yet no one pulled the trigger. Something about that turn, it felt like a gaze, like the ship was looking. Down on Earth, 4 top-level researchers studying the recovered bridge footage committed suicide in the same hour. 2 had clawed their own eyes out before they died. The 3rd left a message, a recording that didn't make it past EarthGov security. But rumors spread that she had spoken in the same inhuman tongue they'd heard over the intercom. Meanwhile, reports of dreams, shared dreams, began circulating among orbital personnel. Dreams of floating in dark space, paralyzed, watching your own body move without your will. Dreams of something speaking through dead mouths, of Earth burning in absolute silence. Back under the Greenland facility, Brody Knox had been moved again. Now he was alone, in Sub-Level 7, a chamber sealed with alloy older than most warships. They called it a black vault. Not even light escaped from that room without permission. Still, he wasn't alone. He talked to someone, every night. They heard him over the internal mics, talking, sometimes laughing, other times screaming until his throat bled. When a guard tried to shut it off, his ears exploded in a spray of red. They stopped trying after that. The last thing recorded before the system died was Brody's voice, calm and clear. "You shouldn't have brought it home. But it's too late now." then silence. And above them, the nightfall began to open. A bay door, never before seen, unfolded from its lower hull like a flower made of bone and steel. Inside, something began to move. The footage cut off halfway through the bay door's opening. Every drone around nightfall went dark, instantaneously. The orbital network above Earth, the defense satellites, even the AI-driven long-range scanners went offline. Not hacked, not jammed, just silenced, like they'd been swallowed whole by something beyond the concept of machine warfare. Admiral Carrington stood before the EarthGov War Council in Geneva, his hands gripping the sides of the table so tightly his knuckles looked like bone. Behind him, blurry, broken images of the last 5 seconds of visual data blinked across the screen. A shape, twisting and rising, impossible to measure, made of light and absence, geometry that defied understanding. "We believe it's not technology," he said, voice hoarse. "It's not a weapon, it's a presence." The room was dead quiet. "A consciousness?" one of the envoys asked. Carrington's eyes narrowed. "Number worse. A consequence." A few officials scoffed. One stood up. "With all due respect, Admiral, this sounds like mysticism, not military intelligence. A presence? A shape that can't be measured? We need solutions, not ghost stories." Carrington didn't flinch. He tapped the console, switching the projection to a freeze frame of the object, before the footage failed. The shape had extended what looked like limbs. Too many limbs. They shimmered like starlight, yet cast shadows. It was emerging, and the human brain rejected it on instinct. Some part of it looked human, just long enough to unsettle. This thing came back with nightfall. Maybe it was inside the crew. Maybe it was the crew, but it's not here to negotiate. The council fell into arguing voices, some demanding retaliation, others insisting on containment or contact. It didn't matter. No one noticed that Carrington had gone silent again, his eyes locked on the screen, his fingers twitching like he was trying to speak but couldn't remember how. No one noticed the blood starting to drip from his nose. Aboard the orbital lab ship Lucidity, orbiting 30,000 kilometers from nightfall, Dr. Marin Alvarez stared at the DNA sequence they'd pulled from one of the fragments found on Brody's suit. She didn't sleep for the last 46 hours. Her fingers were trembling. Not from caffeine. She couldn't feel her left arm anymore. The genetic structure was human. That was the first terror. But then not quite. It started human, but something had overwritten it. Layer by layer. A slow, creeping mimicry, like the body had been rewritten from the inside out, keeping the surface intact until the host died. Or worse. She traced it back and found an anomaly. A sequence embedded like code. It wasn't natural. It was a message. Just 6 words. "We are the voice between stars." She didn't scream. She just stood up, picked up the scalpel from her table, and whispered something in that same alien tongue they'd started hearing from the vault below Greenland. And then she slit her throat. Down in the black vault, Brody Knox began humming. The guards monitoring his room had long since stopped trying to understand the words he muttered. But the hum, low, almost melodic, was new. It vibrated the walls, made teeth ache. Some said it wasn't coming from his mouth at all, but from the room itself, as if the space around him had started to hum with him. The scientists still alive weren't sleeping anymore. They reported hallucinations, whispers in reflections, nightmares while awake. One junior tech wandered into an engine turbine, smiling the whole time. The vault remained sealed, but something had begun growing inside. The walls, once smooth, now glistened with a resin-like layer. Organic, pulsing, alive. One scientist made the mistake of touching it. Her blood boiled out through her pores in less than a second. And Brody? He just kept humming. Back in orbit, the nightfall opened fully. The thing inside stepped out. It didn't move like a being. It unfolded, slid, bent through angles that didn't exist in human physics. Its form wasn't stable. It flickered between impossible shapes. At one moment, it resembled the silhouette of a man. Another moment, it looked like a crucifix made of tendrils and void. Then something insectile, something divine, something ancient and watching. All defense systems aimed and fired. Missiles detonated, laser weapons blazed across space, kinetic rods dropped like thunder. They passed through it. It didn't dodge, it didn't acknowledge, it kept descending, not toward the defense satellites, not toward any military target. It was heading for Earth's oceans. Specifically, the Mariana Trench, the deepest, darkest part of the planet. As if it had been there before, as if it was coming home. The world watched as the entity from Nightfall vanished beneath the Pacific Ocean like it belonged there. It didn't splash, it didn't sink. It simply entered, like the water welcomed it back. A global silence followed. No signal, no sighting, no clue where it had gone. Until the earthquakes began. First minor, tremors along the Mariana Plate, then stronger, deep, groaning shifts that registered on every seismic monitor. Unnatural, too rhythmic, almost like breathing. Admiral Carrington was gone now, disappeared 2 days after the last council meeting. His quarters had been found ransacked, blood smeared along the walls in symbols no one could decipher. His security logs ended with a single recorded phrase, whispered in his own voice. "The trench remembers." Back in the Greenland vault, Brody Knox stood completely still in the center of his containment chamber. Surveillance footage showed he hadn't moved in 23 hours. No eating, no speaking. Just staring at the wall, eyes open, breathing slow. Then, without warning, the walls around him cracked. Not exploded, not melted, cracked, like ice under pressure. Spiderweb lines running across every inch of the black alloy, the strongest man-made material on Earth. The cameras went dead. The power failed. The emergency crew arrived 3 minutes later to find the chamber completely hollow. No Brody. Just a pool of thick, tar-like fluid, and a single phrase burned into the floor in jagged marks. He remembers now. On board Lucidity, what remained of Dr. Alvarez's team recovered one final data log from the Nightfall's internal archives, filed under a corrupted folder labeled ECHO. The footage was ancient, recorded just 6 weeks before the ship vanished 214 years ago. It showed Captain Elias Knox and his senior officers standing in a dim corridor, lit only by emergency red lights. Behind them, a hatch trembled, with something pounding from the other side. One of the officers was screaming, "It's inside the fucking crew! It's rewriting them!" Elias's face remained calm. Too calm. He turned to the camera. His voice, slow, like something was puppeting it. "It wants to understand us. That's why it keeps us alive." One of the officers turned, retching blood. Another began convulsing. Elias looked directly into the lens, his eyes glowing faintly. "It doesn't need ships. It needs stories, souls. It feeds on memory, and now we carry it." Then the recording cut. The last frame? Elias smiling, with something crawling beneath the skin of his neck. Down in the Pacific, something massive stirred. A U.S. Navy deep-sea probe caught a fragment of visual data, a faint shape moving at extreme depth. The object was wider than any known biological organism, and it moved against pressure that should have crushed even reinforced steel. And then the sonar pulses stopped working. The ocean stopped echoing, as if the water itself had ceased to reflect sound. Within 12 hours, all sea-based satellites began malfunctioning. Tides shifted slightly, just enough to raise eyebrows, just enough to be noticed. The Mariana Trench was now silent, lightless, dead to sensors, a void. The media spun it as tectonic anomalies. Power grids surged from disinformation, hacked or blacked out. But those who were in the know, the black-level operators and ghost-budget scientists, they weren't sleeping anymore. Because Nightfall's presence wasn't passive. It was sending out a signal, not radio, not electromagnetic. A psychic pulse. A frequency buried in the human brain, in the oldest part of the species' memory. People started remembering things that never happened. Men in military bunkers woke up screaming in dead languages. Children across 5 continents began drawing the same symbol, a spiral of mouths bleeding into a sunless sea. The Vatican released an emergency statement, then went dark. China's lunar colony reported seeing a shadow on the Earth, despite the planet being in full sunlight. And Brody Knox, he walked out of the ocean 6 days later, naked, unharmed, smiling. His blood had changed, his DNA no longer registered as human, but he spoke clearly. "It was never alien," he said. "It didn't come from out there. It came from beneath. We left thinking we were exploring space, but Nightfall only took us deeper into ourselves." He pointed toward the sky. "And now we've brought it back to finish what it started." Brody Knox was taken immediately, escorted not by soldiers, but by suits. No rank, no flags, just eyes like empty rooms and questions they already knew the answers to. He was flown to a mobile black site off the coast of Chile. The base was underground, submerged, and coded as an old seismic station. They thought it would be secure. They were wrong. Within hours of Brody's arrival, one of the lead interrogators bit off his own tongue and smeared it across the mirrored wall of the interview chamber. The others began losing time. One agent woke up strapped to his own chair, his voice gone, hands blooded. Another simply vanished, his clothes left behind, folded neatly on the floor like he'd been peeled out of existence. And Brody. He didn't scream, didn't threaten, didn't even speak anymore. He just stared at the glass, grinning with a patience that made the air feel too thick to breathe. They didn't know he wasn't alone. In Geneva, the EarthGov Council had fractured. Half the council demanded all-out retaliation, detonate the trench, nuke the coordinates, bury the entity under layers of earth and pressure. The other half whispered of surrender, worship. They'd begun referring to the thing beneath the sea as it, not the entity, not the anomaly, just it. Like it had always been there, like they already feared it more than they understood it. The final vote was split, until a key member, Councillor Drevnik, opened fire during the session, killing 2 delegates and shouting phrases that didn't belong to any known language. His blood poured upward, not down. It defied gravity as it spiraled toward the ceiling in deliberate patterns. Symbols. A message. You are not the apex. You are the path. Meanwhile, back on Lucidity, Dr. Kovacs ran the final analysis of the genetic samples pulled from Brody. She didn't know who to tell. There was no one left she could trust. The data was clear. His genome wasn't evolving. It was reverting. The human genome contains ancient code, remnants from the earliest origins of life, biological fossils buried in our DNA. Brody's body had reactivated them. Parts of his brain lit up that hadn't been used in 1,000,000 years. Entire systems were forming within him that didn't exist in modern biology. It wasn't infection, it was awakening. Worse, Kovacs discovered a secondary signal. Not psychic, not linguistic. A biological beacon, embedded in human cells. As if humanity had always carried a signal, dormant and buried, waiting to be triggered. And Nightfall triggered it. In the Pacific, the sea cracked open. The Mariana Trench didn't just quake, it tore apart. The ocean split down the middle as if something enormous had clawed its way up from the planet's bones. Satellite footage, what little escaped EarthGov firewalls, showed a column of water rising unnaturally high, standing against gravity. Inside the vortex, shapes moved. Not ships, not animals, structures, ruins, like cities carved from bone and obsidian, rising from the bottom of the ocean as if time itself had reversed. And within those ruins, lights pulsed, colorless, chaotic, like thoughts bleeding into vision. People across the world collapsed at once, thousands, then tens of thousands. They all spoke the same phrase as they lost consciousness. "We've come home to our masters." Hospitals overflowed with the catatonic. Psych wards filled with those babbling in lost languages. Governments fell silent. And Brody, now fully changed, walked into the sea again. This time not alone. Behind him marched thousands, all of them smiling, all of them with spirals carved into their skin. One final transmission echoed across every known frequency, from every radio, every satellite, every smart device. A voice, not human, not alien, just ancient. You were the key, not the guardians, not the warriors, just the dreamers. And we are awake now. You will remember your place, beneath us. It started with the oceans pulling back. Not just a tide, not a tsunami. The sea itself receded, miles inland, exposing ancient rock and trench scars never meant to be seen by living eyes. Coastal cities stood paralyzed as water vanished from their horizons, revealing miles of glistening seabed, steaming with unnatural heat and riddled with symbols no human culture had ever etched. Then came the sound, a low, endless tone, subsonic but deafening. It vibrated in bone and thought, not ears. The kind of sound that made animals bolt into walls and people scratch at their own skulls just to make it stop. Military forces were deployed, what remained of them. Drones, jets, Navy fleets stationed along Pacific lines. They never made it close. The moment any electronic system entered a 500-mile radius of the trench, it simply died. Mid-flight, mid-command, mid-breath. The machines shut down, and the soldiers either turned on each other or themselves. Some walked into the sea and never came back. Those who survived came back whispering about the architects. That's what they called the structures now rising from the trench. Pyramids without faces, towers that bent light, monuments built to align with star patterns humanity hadn't discovered yet. They weren't ruins. They were altars. Brody Knox stood at the center of it all, naked, calm, changed beyond recognition. His skin had turned grey-pale, patterned with veins of black and gold, pulsing in slow rhythm with the structures behind him. Around him, thousands knelt, his disciples. Not converts, not worshippers, hosts. Each one had been marked, carved, awakened. The spiral burned into their flesh like a birthmark of obedience. He raised his hand, and the sky turned red. No explosion, no fire, just a shift, like something had blinked behind the sun. For 6 minutes, the world lost color. The sky became blood. Shadows stretched in directions that made no sense. Time distorted. People reported living full days within those 6 minutes. Others claimed to see their dead loved ones walking the streets. And in that time, the oceans came back, rushed in with a vengeance, swallowing cities, dragging skyscrapers into foam and silence. It wasn't rage, it was reclamation. Earth, it seemed, was being reset. Deep in the remnants of the Greenland Vault, a handful of researchers who survived the breach pieced together what little they could. They cross-referenced the symbols carved into Brody's cell. the alien phrases spoken by coma victims, and the strange DNA evolution patterns. The conclusion wasn't scientific, it was myth. Every culture had stories of gods beneath the sea, ancient sleepers, forgotten architects, Atlantis, R'lyeh, Lemuria, the drowned kings. All the same story in different tongues. The researchers realized nightfall didn't discover anything. It simply woke it up. Humanity had been built over something else, something older, something that never forgot. It wasn't alien, it was original. Humanity, they realized too late, was just a mask. Global order collapsed within a week. Satellites fell from orbit. The moon cracked along its dark side, revealing honeycomb-like structures beneath the rock. Cities tore themselves apart in panic, then silence, then praise. Because soon, entire populations wanted to be changed. They opened their homes to the pulse. They cut spirals into their children. They walked into the sea. And Brody? He knelt before the largest altar, his hands submerged in the black tide, his body splitting open without pain. From inside him, something began to climb out. Not a creature, but a shape made of memory and hunger. It had no name, only a purpose: to reclaim its inheritance. The skies opened above Earth, and what looked down wasn't a god. It was a mirror, a reflection of humanity twisted by truth. The skies bled light that made no sense. Colors no spectrum could define poured through the clouds, stretching across the planet like veins. People stared up in silence, some weeping, some laughing, some simply kneeling where they stood. They weren't worshipping. They were remembering, because the light didn't just shine. It spoke, not in words but in truths, in ancient buried instincts that peeled away the fragile skin of civilization. And beneath that skin, what was left wasn't human. It was something older, something that once crawled through oceans under blood-red moons and knelt before titans made of thought and nightmare. The light reminded them of that, and they obeyed. Across the continents, governments collapsed not through war, but surrender. Entire armies disbanded without orders. Missiles remained unfired. Pilots ejected into the sky and let the sea swallow them. Cities once proud of their independence opened their gates to nothing at all, as if expecting kings to walk in. But nothing came. Only silence, only the sound of the tide rising. In the remnants of what used to be London, Professor Elena Maris stood atop the broken tower of Westminster, scrawling the same phrase again and again into the stone with her own bloodied fingers. "We are not the descendants, we are the experiments." Her team had uncovered classified Vatican manuscripts weeks before the world cracked, texts dating back to the first papal expansions into the New World. It mentioned the drowned script and the ocean tongue, forbidden even among the most excommunicated cults. One passage haunted her. "And when man walks among stars, he shall return with the seed of those who planted him." She didn't believe it, until nightfall came home, until the drowned cities rose, until the blood of changed men began to sing. Back in the Pacific, the trench was gone. Not collapsed, reversed. A tower now stretched from its center, scraping through the ocean surface like a needle. Black, endless, alive. It wasn't built, it had grown, and within it, something massive stirred. Brody Knox stood at its base, no longer fully corporeal. His skin shimmered like water. His eyes were galaxies of decay. His voice was layered, hundreds of tones speaking at once. But what terrified the last observers wasn't his transformation. It was his serenity. He no longer hated. He didn't gloat. He didn't threaten. He welcomed. "You feared extinction," he said, his voice carried by the pulse in every brain on Earth. "You feared replacement, but the truth is simpler." He raised his hand. You were never supposed to last." The tower groaned. Then it opened. From inside came shapes that didn't walk. They bent. Creatures that flickered between dimensions. Faces half human, half forgotten. Beings too large to see whole, too fast to capture. They didn't attack. They entered. Minds, cities, memories. Reality itself began to stretch. Language broke down. Clocks ran backward. Gravity became optional. Children levitated in schools, drawing spirals in the air with their tongues. Time folded. Death reversed. And still the people welcomed it. Because the light had taught them this wasn't a conquest. It was a return. Some resisted. Small pockets, old nuclear silos, remote monasteries, underground bunkers hidden in deserts and under polar caps. The uncorrupted, the forgotten, the unconnected. But even they knew it wouldn't last. Because resistance wasn't strength anymore. It was irrelevance. One last message was broadcast from a station hidden in the Ural Mountains. A man's voice, tired, broken, but clear. "I don't know what we were. Maybe a joke, maybe a trial run. But I know now. We were never alone. We were never in control. We were the prelude." Then static. Then silence. And above it all, the tower pulsed. It didn't send ships. It didn't summon armies. It simply kept growing. Because Earth wasn't the final stage. It was just the first. And nightfall was only the beginning. The tower now reached the edge of space. It pierced the atmosphere like a spear plunged from the ocean's floor into the stars, a structure so massive that time bent around it. Storms formed endlessly in its shadow. The moon's orbit shifted to accommodate its presence. Gravity bowed to its mass. It was not just a structure, it was a signal, a lighthouse screaming into the void. "We have completed the first harvest." The creatures that emerged from it no longer bothered to hide their form. They walked openly now, through flooded cities, through ruined temples, across broken highways. They didn't speak. They didn't kill. They simply moved among the changed, the marked, the returned. Humanity didn't fight back. There was no point. The resistance, the last gasping breath of species pride, had already crumbled. Nuclear bunkers went silent. Satellites fell from the sky like burned-out stars. Entire forests turned black overnight and began humming the spiral song. The survivors weren't spared. They were watched. Not by the creatures, by the world itself, because Earth had changed. The planet began reshaping, not with machines, but with memory. Oceans drained into the core, mountains collapsed in on themselves. The sky opened wider, like a curtain being pulled back. And behind that curtain, not space, not stars, a sea. Endless, featureless, ancient. It wasn't just the creatures that returned. It was the original world beneath this one, the drowned reality, the true Earth, and it was hungry for its throne. At the peak of the tower, Brody Knox stood with his arms open wide. He no longer resembled anything human. His body shimmered between dimensions. His voice echoed from the bones of the planet. And when he finally spoke, it was not to command, but to explain. "You called it discovery, progress, expansion," he said, his voice falling on every ear, inside every thought. "But space was not yours to reach. The stars were never your home. They were prisons, each one a cell, each void a wall." He gestured to the sky, and it cracked, showing glimpses of other worlds, other towers, other harvests. "You were not the first. You will not be the last." From the tower a light burst forth, so bright it erased shadows, so powerful it seared away the lie of individuality. In that moment every human saw everything. Past lives, other selves, the truth of what they were, not gods, not souls, just echoes. echoes of an ancient experiment abandoned and now reabsorbed. And then came the silence. No sound, no thought, just being. The world fell still, the sea retreated once more, the tower dimmed, and Earth rebooted. Not to year 0, to year 1, not a reset for humanity, but a beginning for what would replace it. The skies filled with the new forms, not quite flesh, not quite energy. The architects walked freely now, reclaiming the soil and sea as they remade the planet into something familiar, something rightful. And somewhere, deep beneath the Mariana Trench, in a chamber older than time, a seed pulsed. A second nightfall, waiting for the next world, the next story, the next echo.